You are watching the World 24/7 on the NDTV network. I'm Parmeshwar Bawa. Let's begin with the headlines we're tracking at the moment. The Prime Minister will become the first Indian Prime Minister to visit Brunei when he travels to the country for a bilateral visit. He will be there until the 4th of September, after which he heads to Singapore. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu remained defiant amid mounting international and domestic pressure to secure a ceasefire agreement to release Israeli hostages in Gaza. The Russian president arrived in Mongolia, a member of the international court that issued an arrest warrant for him. This official visit is Putin's first to a member country of the International Criminal Court since it issued a warrant for his arrest nearly 18 months ago. Brazil's regulators have threatened to revoke the license of Elon Musk's Starlink for disobeying a Supreme Court ruling ordering all internet providers to shut down Musk's platform X. Pope Francis left Rome for Indonesia, where the 87-year-old leader of the global Catholic Church will start an ambitious 12-day tour to 4 countries in Southeast Asia. Former US President Donald Trump has issued a stark warning to Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg in his forthcoming book, Save America. Trump claims that Zuckerberg could face life in prison if his company interferes in the upcoming US presidential election. China has threatened a severe economic retaliation against Japan if Tokyo persisted in restricting the sale of chip-making equipment to Chinese firms. Well, our big focus, Prime Minister Modi will arrive in Brunei's capital today, kicking off a significant 2-nation tour this week. Following his visit to Brunei, our Prime Minister will head to Singapore tomorrow, but in Brunei, he's set to meet with Sultan Hassan Al Bolkiah, the world's longest-serving monarch, who has been in power since 1967. Now, during this visit, India and Brunei will also sign a new memorandum of understanding on space cooperation, building on the 2018 agreement on satellite tracking. As far as the agenda for Singapore is concerned, our Prime Minister will meet the new Prime Minister Lawrence Wong there, who was sworn in May this year, and the two leaders will witness the signing of 4 agreements on semiconductors, digital cooperation, healthcare, as well as skilling. Singapore, by the way, is India's largest trade partner in ASEAN, and the country is the leading source of foreign direct investment as well. But a little context for you here. Prime Minister Manmohan Singh actually visited Brunei in 2013 to attend the ASEAN-India Summit and East Asia Summit. And Vice President Hamid Ansari's visit in 2016 saw many MOUs signed. However, Prime Minister Modi is the first Indian Prime Minister to make a bilateral visit there. Here's what the Ministry of External Affairs said regarding his plan of action.
On hydrocarbons, we have been importing hydrocarbons from Brunei, and in the long run, we would like to have more predictable supplies, with longer-term contracts from Brunei, especially in the area of gas, in which we see that India's demand for natural gas will increase many times in the near future. So that is an opportunity for the Brunei side to lock in long-term gas supply arrangements if they wish to do so. We have ongoing cooperation with Brunei, as I mentioned, in telemetry, tracking and command. And we will take this forward as technology develops, as our requirements develop. So also the need for enhancing those capabilities in the various centers we have worldwide for our telemetry, tracking and command increase or change. So you will see that. I don't want to jump the gun here, but you will see some discussion and outcomes from that as well.
Mohammed Ghazali is tracking the details of this 2-nation tour very closely. He joins us live at the moment. Ghazali, this visit to the 2 ASEAN member countries is a contrast in many ways also, right? Although India has had historically close ties with both Brunei and Singapore that were once under British occupation.
Yes, certainly. And why this is interesting, Parma, because if you see the kind of foreign policy we are practicing in Modi 3.0 or the Indian government is practicing, you will see there is a larger focus on the immediate neighborhood, or to say that what kind of relations we are fostering in our South Asian region. So if you see Prime Minister, the External Affairs Minister, say in this third term since July, have been meeting around leaders in the immediate neighborhood, be it Bangladesh, before the entire debacle happened there, the regime change. Then we have fostered our ties and warmed up with Maldives. The Foreign Secretary went to Nepal and Bhutan. And now we are seeing Indian Prime Minister going to Brunei. And Brunei, this is the first ever trip of an Indian Prime Minister on a bilateral visit to Brunei on the invite of the head of the state. And also, as you rightly mentioned, that India is also kind of not relying on just one partner for one of the technology or needs. Like we knew that for defense, India was always reliant on Russia. Then its reliance diversified. We have multiple partners. So in the same way, we are diversifying our relations as well in South Asia. And that's why Brunei is important. We are importing hydrocarbons from Brunei, and now in the near future, perhaps after this bilateral meeting of the Prime Minister with the head of state of Brunei, India is also looking to sort of import natural gas in the future, because India's energy needs will also increase with the passage of time, and in years to come, India will have to diversify its partners in need. So Brunei could be one potential partner which is already providing us hydrocarbon. Also, India has close ties with Brunei when it comes to space technology. We have also installed, a couple of years ago, India had installed some satellite tracking technology there in Brunei. Besides that, in this particular trip, India will have bilateral talks and discussions on space technology, agriculture, food technology, a defense cooperation. A joint working group of both the countries over the defense issue will also be constituted in near future. So this visit, not just to Brunei, but even to Singapore, because Singapore, a team of union ministers had gone there just last month. So it's a follow-up by the Prime Minister, and many more deals and announcements could be made during this 2-day trip, 3-day trip of Prime Minister to Brunei as well as Singapore.
We will, of course, revert to you for regular updates during this two-nation tour. Thanks so much, as always, Ghazali, for joining us with the latest. We also have with us, live from Singapore at the moment, Girija Pandey. Thank you so much, sir, for making time for us on the World 24/7. We are aware that where you are, Singapore is actually India's 6th largest trading partner. It's the largest in the ASEAN region, whereas Brunei, sir, fairly has lowest trading figures with India. We are aware that officials have been trying to improve trading figures with both the countries, especially in terms of reducing tariffs. But are you hopeful of some significant steps in this direction during the Prime Minister's touchdown in both Brunei and Singapore?
I think you have to look at this visit more as a look east, part of the look east policy of India with ASEAN. So India has been trying to closely work with ASEAN. There are FTAs have been signed with ASEAN over the last 10, 15 years. There's a growth in relationship, trade relationship with all the ASEAN countries. Brunei is, of course, a new one in a sense that it is more oil and gas initially. But Singapore has been a very heart of India's ASEAN story, where, we have large investments both sides, and of course, a very large trade. And then there is an ASEAN-India trade. ASEAN is the 3rd largest importer into India of nearly $87 billion last year. Of course, there is a net trade deficit with ASEAN, but huge investments coming through, nearly $25 billion of investments both ways. So this is a big story. A lot of Singaporean companies are in India, the big ones. I mean, there is as you know, investments in Airtel. There is an investment in Air India. Similarly, the Indian companies are here in large numbers, not only working in Singapore, but also accessing the Asia Pacific and ASEAN market. So there is a lot happening, and it's a good time that the PM is revitalizing the ASEAN-India story. After all, this is India's backyard.
In terms of just Brunei, if we talk about the strategic significance, which you just briefly touched upon, it does hold strategic significance given its location in the Indo-Pacific region, sir. But do you think this visit will also seek to give more heft to the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity, which India, Singapore and Brunei are part of?
Yes, I mean, Brunei is very much part of the ASEAN, very much close. It's a very oil-rich kingdom, as all of you know. And it's strategically located within the Asia-Pac region, especially in the South China Sea.
Yeah. And during this visit, we also know that the Prime Minister is going to be addressing many CEOs in Singapore. They'll get to hear India's growth story firsthand, as the MEA put it. But it also comes at a time when a new leader is in Singapore. In that sense, sir, would you say this visit will actually mark a resurrection of interest in Singapore's government towards India?
Well, you know, Singapore, India have had relationship when the first free trade agreement India ever signed with anyone was with Singapore in 2005. And since then, growth has been going on. The political relationships have been very good. The defense relationships have been very good. And of course, the trade and investment relationship have been excellent. I mean, Singapore is one of the largest investors in India. And there is no doubt that every government that has come from Singapore or India have actually just added to that relationship. And therefore, this visit is very timely because we have a new Prime Minister in Singapore. And I think it will be good to have leader meeting each other for the first time as the Prime Minister. And of course, he would be talking to a lot of CEOs who have already invested in. Singapore knows India quite well. And it's a reiteration of India's commitment to look east and strengthening relationships in trade and investment, because Singapore looks at trade and investments across the region.
Well, thank you so much, sir, as always, for making time for us and joining us. We will, of course, revert to you for updates when the Prime Minister wraps up this two-nation tour. The Indian side would want to engage with Mr. Wong, who has tried a completely different career trajectory, many would argue, than his predecessor. Many also argue that Mr. Wong is seen as a centrist or left of centre, despite Singapore being a free market. He has actually introduced a wave of reforms and policies that are aimed at the welfare of the common man, as opposed to just the elite. Meanwhile, let's turn our attention now to what the Russian president is up to. Well, Vladimir Putin arrived in Mongolia, his first visit to a member country of the International Criminal Court since it ordered his arrest last year. Ukraine called on Mongolia to detain him, but there is no risk of Putin's arrest. This is what a political consultant close to the Kremlin has confirmed to local media, noting that there would be given guarantees ahead of this trip. But Mongolia's balancing act of maintaining ties with its powerful neighbors Russia and China, while seeking closer relations with the United States, has become more difficult since the war in Ukraine, particularly as 95% of Mongolian fuel comes from Russia. This visit is being closely watched, not just by the United States, but by China as well. Well, news and updates continue in a moment, right after this very short break. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu remained defiant amid mounting international and domestic pressure to secure a ceasefire agreement to release Israeli hostages in Gaza. The killings of 6 hostages held by Hamas spurred protests and labor strikes in Israel in one of the most significant demonstrations of public outrage against Netanyahu since the war began. US President Joe Biden also rebuked him for not doing enough to secure a deal, while the UK said it would suspend 30 arms export licenses to Israel over humanitarian concerns. Here are the finer details.
In an unprecedented move in the nearly 11th month-long war in Gaza, the UK has moved to immediately suspend 30 arms export licenses to Israel after a review by the new Labour government found a clear risk that the arms might be used in serious violation of humanitarian law.
But to license arms exports to Israel, we must assess their compliance with international humanitarian law, notwithstanding the abhorrence of their opponents' tactics and ideology. Third, this is not a blanket ban. This is not an arms embargo. It targets around 30, approximately 350 licenses to Israel in total for items which could be used in the current conflict in Gaza. The rest will continue.
Meanwhile, in Israel, a rare call for a general strike led to closures and other disruptions nationwide. Hundreds of thousands of Israelis took to the streets after 6 hostages were found dead in Gaza in the largest protest since the start of the war. Protesters blamed Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu for the deaths of the hostages, claiming that the hostages could have been returned alive if a ceasefire deal with Hamas was finalized. Israel's largest trade union, the Histadrut, called for a day-long general strike to shut down and disrupt major sectors of the economy, including banking, healthcare, and the country's main airport. Israel's labor court ordered the strike come to an end by Monday afternoon, claiming that it was politically motivated. The trade union abided and called off the strike earlier than originally planned. U.S. President Joe Biden also claimed that the Israeli Prime Minister was not doing enough to finalize a deal. Biden's remarks came as the United States, Egypt, and Qatar plan to present a take-it-or-leave-it deal to Israel and Hamas in the coming weeks.
Are you planning to present a final hostage deal for both sides this week?
We're very close to that.
What makes you think that this deal will be successful in a way that the other deals were not?
Hope springs eternal.
Mr. President, do you think it's time for Prime Minister Netanyahu to do more on this issue? Do you think he's doing enough?
No.
Israeli forces continue to pound the Gaza Strip. Large-scale raids in the occupied West Bank have killed at least 29 as Israel's siege on the Jenin refugee camp deprived Palestinians of access to food, water, power, or internet. With mounting criticism of how the Israel-Gaza war is being handled, the focus is now on the ceasefire deal intended to end nearly 11 months of devastation. Samia Afsar for NDTV World.
Now, in many states in the US this November, the presidential candidate who snags the winner's share of electoral votes is unlikely to be a surprise. Across 7 swing states, stretching from the desert southwest to the upper Midwest and back down into the south, the outcome remains very much in play, and the 93 votes up for grabs are likely to decide who ultimately ends up in the White House come January. That's the case even after a historic reset of the race. But in case you need clarity, a swing state, according to a by-the-book definition, is one that's considered to play a key role in the outcome of presidential elections, and where candidates of both the Democratic and Republican parties have similar levels of support. If you want to know where both sides think the 2024 election is going to be won or lost, look at where they're aiming their campaign planes and, perhaps more importantly, their checkbooks. The Democrats gained the presidency in 2020 with the support of the Grand Canyon state, which narrowly voted to back their party's candidate for the first time since the 1990s. Arizona now borders Mexico, as you know, for hundreds of miles and has become a focal point of the nation's immigration debate. Border crossings have fallen in recent months, though, from records high, which have made the issue near the top of voters' concerns. Trump has repeatedly attacked Kamala Harris's record on immigration, though, because she was given a role by Joe Biden in trying to ease the border crisis. He has also vowed to carry out the largest deportation operation in U.S. history if he regains the presidency. Arizona, by the way, also hosted a bitter row over abortion access after state Republicans attempted to reinstate a 160-year-old near-total ban on terminating pregnancies, but were foiled. But the issue has become an explosive one nationwide in the US since 2022, when the US Supreme Court overturned a landmark ruling that gave women the constitutional right to abortion. In Georgia, alleged election interference has landed Trump in one of his 4 criminal prosecutions. As you know, Trump has been convicted in one case while the remaining are ongoing, but he and 18 others are accused of conspiring to overturn his narrow defeat to Biden in the state. But Trump, in classic Trump style, denies any wrongdoing, and the case looks increasingly unlikely to be heard in court before the November election. But you must note that a third of Georgia's population is African American, one of the country's largest proportions of black residents, and it is believed that this demographic was instrumental in Biden flipping the state in 2020. Now, some disillusionment with Mr. Biden had been reported among America's black voters, but the Harris campaign hopes to animate this constituency. On to Michigan, a state that's been a major player in the last two presidential elections. Despite supporting Biden in 2020, Michigan has become a focal point in the debate over US support for Israel amid the ongoing war in Gaza. In Michigan's Democratic primary this past February, over 1 lakh voters chose the uncommitted option, reflecting a push by activists who want the US to stop its military aid to Israel. Now, this is especially significant because Michigan has the largest Arab American population in the country, and their support for Biden has been wavering. Kamala Harris has taken a firmer stand on Israel, and some Gaza protesters are a little hopeful she might be more sympathetic to their cause. Meanwhile, Trump has spotlighted Michigan in his election strategy. On to the silver state that has voted Democrat for the last several elections, but there are signs of a possible turnaround by the Republicans. Recent averages published by poll tracking firm 538 indicate that polls once showed Trump enjoying a wide lead over Joe Biden, but that advantage has shrunk since Kamala Harris became the top of the ticket. Democrats had hoped a candidate with greater appeal to younger and more diverse voters would close the gap, but both candidates are vying to win the state's sizable Latino population. Despite the fact that the US economy has shown strong growth and jobs creation since Biden took the presidency, the post-COVID recovery has been slower in Nevada than anywhere else. In fact, at 5.1%, the state has the highest unemployment rate in the US after California and the District of Columbia, according to the latest US government statistics. Turning to North Carolina, where the political landscape is getting more competitive, some analysts are now calling it a toss-up, but this shift may explain why former President Trump chose North Carolina for his first outdoor rally since the assassination attempt on him in July. Addressing his supporters, Trump emphasized the importance of the state, saying this state is a very, very big state to win. On the Democratic side, the party spotlighted North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper on the final night of their convention, underscoring the state's significance. But you must note that North Carolina shares some key electoral concerns with neighboring Georgia and Arizona, other critical Sun Belt states. And Trump, by the way, won North Carolina by just over 70,000 votes back in 2020, fueling Democratic hopes that this purple state, which can swing either way, might be up for grabs this election year. Next up, let's talk about Pennsylvania, where both parties campaigning with great gusto at the moment. This state became a key battleground in the 2020 election, swinging to support Joe Biden, who has a personal connection to the working-class city of Scranton, where he grew up. Inflation is a top concern here, as it is across the United States, but prices spiked under the Biden administration. They, though, have come down since, but in Pennsylvania, grocery prices have surged faster than any other state. In fact, in certain areas, many residents are grappling with food insecurity there. Let's turn to Wisconsin now, a state that has been crucial in recent presidential elections, picking the winner in both 2016 and 2020 by just over 20,000 votes each time. In battlegrounds like Wisconsin, third-party candidates can have a big impact.